Hello, and welcome to Please Me. Last week, Annie Temple was on the show talking about how the sex worker industry helped support her in all her times of need throughout her life, and most recently helped her to become a best-selling author of her book called Annie Temple's Bible for Erotic Entrepreneurs. Our interview could have gone on for hours. Be sure to go check it out. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Eve is a licensed physical therapist who is on a mission to destigmatize conversations about sex. In her PT practice, Eve treats conditions related to sexual health. Please relax and enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex by turning the sheets into our classroom. Today, I am so excited to welcome a guest named Marina Pearson, and she is the best-selling author and speaker, and her book is called Goodbye, Mr. X, A Woman's Guide to Moving On. And I am so excited to hear all about the book and all about what she's been doing. She is also the founder of Divorce Shift, which is an organization that helps women heal from their ex relationships in a safe and nurturing environment. And oh my goodness, boy, do we need this. You know, I mean, with the divorce rate being 50%, I know in the US, I'm not sure what it is in España or in Spain, where you're located, or in the UK, where you were raised. But, it is very high. And I just recently found out about some statistics where, the divorce rate for second marriages is even higher than 50%, and third marriages is even higher than that. So, with that much divorce happening in our world, we really do need help with, getting over these relationships and moving on and creating a better life. And I myself, have gotten divorced as well. So I can totally relate to what you're doing, and I just can't wait to hear about it. So how are you today? Let me just ask you that first.
I'm good, Eve. I'm good.
Wonderful. I'm so happy to have you on today. Um, you've been featured, I know, on the Daily Mail, The Guardian, Mary Claire, MSN Her, Top Santé Magazine, and many more. And now you're on Please Me. So without
Yes.
further ado, I would like to bring you on and ask you some questions today. Let's talk about the journey from shame to satisfaction in the bedroom for you.
Well, it's a great start. So, it's funny because my words for it would be pleasing to pleasure. And my journey, my sexual journey started pretty abruptly. Um, when I was 16 years old, I lost my virginity to a guy that I was going out with, I was seeing. He invited me down to his a weekend, and uh, I lost my virginity to him. And I thought, well, he snuck into my bedroom, and we did the thing. And the next day, he completely ignored me, and that was the end of the relationship. And so for me, it was kind of like, what the hell just happened? I felt really used. I felt really hurt, but I never verbalized it to him. I kept all of that feeling inside, and I think on the following day, what I realized was is that I made all these beliefs around what sex was to me. It was hurtful, it was painful, it was something that I didn't ever want to feel like that ever again. And so what happened as a result of that was that I ended up using alcohol to numb, and I wouldn't have sex sober. It was just the thing is, at the time I didn't even realize it. At the time, I it was just such a normal thing for me. What would happen is I would get drunk and then I would have sex. And I also at the time was going through an eating disorder. So anything kind of related to sex, anything kind of related to my body, was just such a no go area for me. And it was something that I I felt really awkward about. I remember I was reflecting on this the other day, and I remember I was about 17 years old. I was at a ball and my mum at a dance, and it was a local one. It was one near my home, and my mother came to pick me up. And I was a rebellious teenager basically, and I was being kissed by a boy. Um, and my mother was just completely shocked. She I remember this. She patted me on the shoulder. I turned around, and of course I was completely surprised. I was like, "Oh, what am I? Oh God!" Like that. She just caught me there. The guy was obviously really, really surprised. He had his hand on my bottom, and it was just one of those really awkward moments. But what then ensued really marked me again. And she said to me, "Good girls don't do that. I'm so disappointed in you. I've always thought that you were a good girl and that you were in your bedroom and you were studying, and here you are being all anything but good." So to me, this whole sexual act was just something that was sordid, it was dirty, it was something that like you did um almost like promiscuous. I kind of went into, if there was an archetype, I would have been the whore archetype for this. It was like something I just, here's my body, just have it. It wasn't sacred in any way. And it was just something that I did. It was just part of the role, it was part of the performance. And it wasn't until so this I carried pretty much through my um until I was about 23, 24, and I met somebody who made me feel really safe because, of course, I'd been attracting men who were just in it to win it. They weren't really in it just to hang out with me. They were in it because they, I don't know, found me sexy, found me fun, whatever it was, but they weren't really in it because they really loved me. And I met somebody who then became my first husband. Um, and I felt safe. I felt safe with him. And that's when I first experienced my first orgasm. It was the first time I'd actually experienced squirting, which I was just like, what the hell was that? Because I thought it was pee. And I didn't realize that I had that capacity. But I was practicing a lot of yoga at the time. And I remember distinctly in one class when I was right in the final position, when you lift yourself up and you hold yourself up and you've got your pelvis muscles working and you're breathing really deeply. I was like, oh my God, I'm just about to come. I'm having an orgasm in the middle of the yoga class. So this all felt very disconnected at the time. But over the years, I come to like really connect the dots back. And more about that in a moment. But for now, I knew I had this capacity to connect to that part of myself, and to just enjoy it. But I still felt a little bit awkward. And my relationship to my first husband ended because I was still in that pattern of I need to be loved. I need to prove it to myself that bad boys will fall in love with me, even though he was really like a beautiful soul. I had an affair. And once again, the sex was all about getting drunk and just having sex with this guy. It was nothing more than that. And so these really like, self-abandoning habits, these ways of being, over time I started to realize they're not really that great for me, and it's not something that I really want to keep doing in my life. Because to me it seems like that it causes a lot of destruction. So in my 30s, I started to really look at my relationship patterns. I started to look at my journey thus far. And even though I got into another relationship with somebody that I'd been on and off with for many years, we still would have sex drunk. It wasn't until my second husband that I had this epiphany where it was like, oh my God, I'm not having to have sex drunk anymore. But the realization that I'd had sex drunk most of the time was what startled me. It was like, wow, I'd not realized that I'd been doing that. It just was like you get drunk and then you basically have sex. It's just like something you did. And then I was like, well, does it have to be that way? And why did it? And why was it that way? And what happened? And so as I was exploring this, I started to realize that I had been deeply uncomfortable in my body, and that for some reason at the time that I hadn't connected all the way back to that moment where I lost my virginity, that it felt really unsafe. It felt really unsafe to be in my body sober. It felt like it was too painful for me. And so I I started to explore that. I started to have, with him, it was the first time that I actually started to have sober sex, which was quite an experience for me because I was like, wow, I can feel this thing's going on down there. But interestingly enough, our sexual compatibility was not all that. So he was into things that I really wasn't into. I hadn't even considered sexual compatibility. I've just like, well, it's just sex, isn't it? I was really naive. And so when the relationship broke down, I started to read the new rules about sex. It was such a great book. I don't know if you know the book, but ultimately
No, I haven't read that one.
it, it blew my mind because I so resonated with a lot of what she said around the beliefs I held about sex, prudeness about sex, the feeling uncomfortable about sex. And when my marriage broke down, I then went out with somebody else, and he was all about penetration. Now, for many, many years, I thought I didn't like penetration. I believed that penetration was painful. I believed that, and my ex-husband didn't really do penetration anyway. So we had an interesting life there, mainly because I had these beliefs that I was, sex isn't all that important and we're fine. Oral is fine. Like, yeah, well, And then I was with somebody who was into penetration, and I just thought, well, this is interesting. I thought I wasn't really into penetration, but I could have been wrong. Um, that relationship broke down, and then I was with somebody else who, and this is where things really changed for me because he blamed me for being too big down there, and I started to believe it, and that relationship broke down anyway after a while, and I was left feeling like I wasn't worthy. I was left feeling that I was no good. I was left feeling that and all along this
And there's
time.
something wrong with you. You were probably feeling like there was something physically wrong with you, which a lot of women do,
Yeah,
for different
totally,
reasons.
totally. And what happened is that I'd forgotten that I could squirt. I'd forgotten that I could come. I'd forgotten all of these things because it had been so long since that had happened. Um, 6, 7, 8 years. And I just went along with just having sex. It was nice, it was this, it was that. But the guy that was into penetration wasn't really into dirty sex. He was just like, everything had to be clean. It's rather odd. Okay, everybody has their thing. And it
Sex
was,
is meant to be dirty. It's a
I
messy
know,
affair.
the dirtier, the better.
And it's not meant to be, clean in a
No,
clean environment. Obviously, you want a clean bed and all of that, but like the act itself, I mean, there's
yeah, totally
bodily
right.
fluids
Yeah.
exchanged, and if you squirt, it's very messy. So, absolutely, that's a problem.
Well, at the time, I was just so innocently going from one relationship to the other, going, okay, well, I guess this is how it works. And then I met a guy who, and then things really changed. Um, because what I realized was, and this wasn't because I'd had lots of, different men in my bedroom or whatever, but what I realized was that I still had this thing around if I sleep with a guy for one night, and they don't get to call me back, I feel awful about it. Like, I feel really upset. There's something wrong with me. It was all about me and how wrong everything was about me and this and that. And I thought, I don't want to live this way anymore. I want to know that somebody can come into my bedroom, we can have a great night, and that's it. That's how I want to experience it. So there is the saying in Spanish, which is saying, I put my pants on my head. And I spent 7 or 8 months just exploring this with men. It's interesting. I was reading somebody's Instagram post the other day about how she got through her experience of shame, her sexual shame. And she gave 3 steps. And it's funny because I was just like, well, she went celibate and she self pleasured. And I'm like, well, there are many roads to Rome, darling. And one of them,
And you did sort of the opposite,
I did the opposite.
right? Where
Like what
you
I've read,
decided to open your
right.
bed to many men so that you could tell me what exactly you were looking for, validation or learning how to feel pleasure, or what was it that you, yes. Okay.
I wanted to experience as many men as possible. First of all, it started off with validation. Like I wanted to make sure that there was nothing wrong down there, and there wasn't. Then I realized, well, obviously the guy that I was with obviously understood nothing about his penis. Probably had more to do with the fact that his penis was too small, and we
Right.
were just not sexually compatible. He
Right.
needed a smaller hole. Okay, fair enough. That's not me. And so what I really was exploring was how is it possible for me just to enjoy sex for the sake of pleasure and it not have to mean I want to go out with you, I want to be with you, I want to marry you. It's just I want to experience pleasure tonight and let's do it. We're consenting adults and let's just have fun. And I wanted to get to that point. And so I was open for that. And so I journeyed with 6 or 7 months of different men, different sizes, different nationalities, and just a whole bunch of pleasure. You know, maybe I'd sleep with one guy one night, and then the next night the other guy would come in, or I'd sleep. You know, there might be been 2 guys on the same night, or 2 guys on the same day, one left and one on the night. So I'm not saying this to gloat. All I'm saying is to give you a bit of what happened. And in that exploration, I've got a lot clearer on what I liked, what I didn't like, what was sexy for me, what wasn't not sexy for me. And it was healing for them too. There was a guy that I sort of saw more often than not, and he hadn't had he hadn't come in years. But with our moments of intimacy, final time we had any kind of contact in this he finally came. And it was a beautiful moment, but I knew our connection was done. The job here was done. It was almost like I came into your life for you to realize that you can, and it's all good. Our sexual chemistry was amazing, and so there was many things that I realized. First of all, that there was nothing wrong with me. Second of all, that I can orgasm. I'm multi-orgasmic, which was a really great find. I reconnected back to that, um, to the capacity that I have to squirt and to just orgasm and just to feel into all of that pleasure. And it was funny because there was a guy that I attracted into my life initially who was a sexual healer. Effectively, he liked to just be with lots of women and give them pleasure. And we would go on for hours. I mean, like 4 or 5 hours at a time. And I just found it fascinating because I was like, wow, I didn't know this existed. I certainly didn't know that this was possible for me. Because what would happen? Well, when I was in a relationship with the husbands, it was very much like, okay, the deed is done. Now we're going to bed. It wasn't like, 3 hours of foreplay, and then suddenly, it wasn't that. They weren't sessions. They were just sort of like, well, this is what you do, isn't it? And so I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how to pleasure a man, because at the time I wanted him to teach me how to pleasure a man in a way that, so that in the next relationship I was able to, I won't be like a pro, but certainly be able to do it with confidence and, um, a sense of like, yeah, this is really giving you pleasure. And it was funny because it was all working up to the relationship I have now with my partner. I met him at the end of 2021, I think. 2, 3, 4. No, 2020. And this is where my 6 month project, my 6 month installation had like come to an end.
Okay.
But I was ready for him. And I have never experienced a sex like I do now. Um, it is pleasurable. It is fun. He loves seeing me orgasm. He loves seeing me squirt. He's really into oral. He's also into all of it, all of it. And I never knew that that was possible. Our sex life is amazing, and honestly, it's what I also realized was that, and the funny thing is that when we first met, Victor and I, he started to call my yoni the conch, la concha
Okay.
in Spanish, right?
Uh-huh.
And we've had a journey with her, and so he bought me this. There's a conch here that he
Oh,
bought
yes. Uh-huh.
because he left for about 6 weeks, and he was like, no, he wasn't fully in. Um, but he had to leave to realize, and he came back to me. He goes, I said, because during that time that he was away, he also played around, and he said to me, what I realized was that there was nobody else's concha like yours. And what for me that really, it was almost like, oh wow. He's like, I can't go back to eating fish and chips. I was five-star caviar.
Don't you love those food references? Like a piece of meat, right? But hey, why not?
But
Um,
actually, this, I'm going to share a little bit more about this, but this
yes.
conch,
Okay.
it's the queen conch here. And I discovered her in my garden
Okay. Interestingly
one
enough.
day. But I was looking for something that I could put on my altar and connect with my conch as well. And because what I realized was the power of the conch, the power that we have as women,
Yes.
it brought him back.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never really considered the power of my conch to be anything other than what it's there, it exists, it hangs out, and it creates children, it gives birth, and it basically, brings to life another human being. It's pretty powerful. And also,
Absolutely.
for me, the conch also represents, the power of creation. A lot of, Indian ceremonies use the conch, to initiate the ceremony, to
Mm-hmm.
initiate, open up. And the other thing I didn't know was that Vishnu, um, who was the he was an Indian god that was married to, Lakshmi, who was basically the goddess of money, was holding a conch. She holds a conch as because she prays with the conch. She uses the conch as a divine being, to call in material wealth. And so I was just like, wow, all of these references, but mainly coming back to when she when she was being the queen conch as part, it attracted, he could not be with me because of that. And it wasn't just because of her, but it was a metaphor for the sexual power that we have as women to draw in the masculine because of the power that we have in between our legs. And I'm not saying that it's only that, I'm just saying that it's part of that, but ultimately the realization that how important sex actually is for us, for a partnership, it became really clear to me that it is. I mean, like,
It's the
oh,
glue that holds things together, right? And if you don't have that glue, eventually things will crumble apart. I believe that very much, having been in a sexless, relationship for many years. So coming out of that, in my experience, I had a very similar experience to you where I did a lot of exploration, and it's interesting that you mention alcohol, because I had another guest on a few podcasts ago named Lexi Silver, and we talked about how when you are drinking, you are not able to fully give consent, right? So this is a real problem when you're having sex. If you're not able to give consent, it really is almost like you're being taken advantage of, right? You're an adult and you're allowing this to happen, but if you're not fully able to give consent, then this could potentially be a very negative experience instead of being a very empowering experience. So, out of your journey, you learned how to connect with what I like to call your BCE, or your big clit energy, right? That really gave
yes,
you
the
the
concha energy.
confidence. Right, the concha energy, or the big clit, or we can call it the big conch energy, or the big conch energy, or um, or the big clit energy, right? Which is, the confidence that we have, in and out of the bedroom. It doesn't have to be confidence only in the bedroom. It's the confidence in the boardroom, or in the meeting that you have, or, this podcast, or whatever it may be, to really manifest your true being, as a woman. And the power of, your pussy is huge. And many women don't understand that. And that's what you're talking about here, really trying to get in touch with that power, and being able to hone it. And so I love this story. It's so interesting. I'm
And then what I realized is something else I just wanted to add that's just come to
mhm,
me is that,
yes,
I had always been a people pleaser all my life, and I really struggled with sharing my truth, with sharing my desires, and being able to do so in a really like loving way. It would come out all wrong. It would usually come out, or I would resent because I wasn't able to express. And what I've discovered is that the connection that I had to my conch came at a time. She has a lot of wisdom to share. Um, and when I was going through a lot of anxiety, I would just put my hands over her and just ask her questions, and I would hear the answer. Now, that aside, the more she opened up, the more I opened up here in my throat. So there was a symbiosis happening, and I've understood now that the vocal cords look very much like the um, the
vulva.
anatomy of the
Yeah.
vulva.
Yeah. Yeah. I never really thought about it, but I'm envisioning what the vocal cords look like. And you're absolutely right. They look very much like the vulva. Hmm.
Yeah, and so I made this connection between, if you're orgasming and you're letting your contra express herself, because effectively that's what you're doing, this has to start to express, because
Yes.
you've got to start saying what I like, what I don't like. No, yes, this. Could you carry on a little bit more? Oh, yeah, no. So what I realized was that in her expression, in the conscious expression, the expression of my throat started to clear. I was able to start to actually share more about what I wanted, more about what it wasn't okay for me, what was and also just sharing more about my truth and what I'm okay with and what I need. So making that connection was really like key for me, because often we think that they are separate, but they're not. I've discovered that they're not. They are actually, in order to really have pleasure in the bedroom, you've got to understand what you want and be able to express it, but also understand what you don't want and be able to express it. Also, to understand what your truth is about your sexuality and you know, what's going on for you. Um, and being able to express that too.
Absolutely. Communication. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Telling your partner what you want, what you don't want. Like you said before, you know, oh, that's good. Oh, no, that's not so good. Move a little to the left, move a little to the right, slow down, speed up, whatever it may be, that's going to make you feel good. You need to be able to tell your partner that, because you will never get your needs met unless you're able to open your mouth. And it's interesting to me that your, vagina and vulva and all of that, the relationship that you just drew between the vocal cords, and how getting in touch with your, vagina, you call it your conch or your conch, getting in touch with that was able to let you be able to vocalize more what you really need. And like you said, if you're having a pleasurable experience in the bedroom, right? You can't be quiet. It's automatic that you are going to moan and, make noises. Like your voice is connected to sexual experiences. This is really like an interesting connection that I hadn't really thought about. Um,
Yeah. And so the other thing that became very apparent to me was um, that actually sexes can be really healing. And
yes.
this relationship with my partner has been extremely healing, because he said to me, "Oh, you've got no problem. Like, you're just very juicy down there." And it was just exploring all of these, exploring all of this was fascinating for me. Um, and so, as I said, what I realized was that I really wanted women to go from this pleasing energy to a pleasurable energy, and just to enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely. And I want you to talk a little bit more about how you um, sort of connected the dots with being a people pleaser, as many women are, and you tied it into manifesting your journey. So we're going to sort of switch gears a little bit here, because I want to sort of talk about, the manifester woman that you mentioned, because I'm not familiar with that term. So I would love to sort of go into that topic now.
So, I don't know if any of your listeners know about human design, but I'll just to give you a quick sort of wrap up is summary is that
Yes.
this was downloaded, given to a guy called Ra, and he was like in a state of transcendence for a few days, and he was given all of this information and then he put it out there. And basically what it is that there are 5 energy types. There are generators, reflectors, manifesting generators, projectors, and manifestors. And we all have different auras, we all have different ways of doing things, and we have different lines, which basically mean that we need different things at different times of our life, but also we do life in a really different way. So I'm a manifester. Now, manifestors have a closed aura, supposedly. We are catalysts of change, and we're not supposed to fit in. We're 9% of the population. And um, if your parents didn't know this, you would get reprimanded for being outspoken, for being too boisterous, for not following the rules, for getting into trouble, for not doing what you're told. And um, manifestors are supposed to lead, not be told what to do. They're the only energy type that can initiate. So all the other energy types have to wait. So for example, if I ask my son for some information, he can now give it to me. Ultimately, as a manifester, we can give you the information without having to be asked. So it's a different way of being, and we're catalysts. So what we love to do is have a creative urge and then go run with it. But we need people to finish it off and carry on running it, because suddenly we're like, oh no, I need to go and spend the rest of like the year on the sofa because I'm knackered. So we don't have a defined sacral, which basically means we've only got a limited amount of energy. Now, you can start to see where this is going, because ultimately we are different from everybody else, the energy type. We're supposed to have a lot of rest, which in our today's society is like
Not so easy.
not so easy. And I'm a 3-5, so ultimately I'm 5-3, which basically means that I have these leadership qualities, but also I'm a 3, which ultimately means I learn by doing. So all of my mistakes, I have gleaned some. I'm supposed to like make lots of errors and go back to the collective and say, don't do it that way. It's really bad. This has been my experience of this, and let me show you and tell you some stories about that. Now, you can imagine that in today's society, today, well, back then, doing things that go wrong, most of the time you get reprimanded for that. Well, I knew that was going to happen. You should never have done that. So then you start to have all the judgment from the collective going, no, that's wrong. You should never have done that. Then this closed aura thing where we repel people, and it's just like you either people think, wow, she's amazing, she's really inspiring, or it's like, oh God. And of course, you don't know this. Like I didn't know anything about this. And so I spent most of my time going, why do I feel different? Why I feel like the only way I can fit in is by actually being the same as everybody else. And when I was reflecting on this, I realized like I spent a lot of my childhood with really bad throat issues. Tonsillitis, had them taken out. I would have throat infections. And manifestors are known for having throat wounds. So in other words, not being able to express. Some express way too much. They go to the other side and get really angry and pissed off and rah. And others feel like they can't express themselves because
They
they're
hold
going
it all in.
right. And that was me. I held it all in. I didn't I didn't tell my mother I was being bullied. I didn't tell my mother I was being abused. I didn't tell anybody anything. I would just swallow it, which is probably why I would have all these throat infections. And so, you know, um, then the 5 line gets a lot of projection on them. So what does that mean? Well, people project, like they have this high, like people put me on a pedestal and suddenly I don't meet their expectations. And then they're like, go away. And then they start judging you and telling you all sorts of things. Now, with all of that going on, if you don't know this, you're not conscious of the fact that you're supposed to trigger lots of people. You're supposed to be the catalyst. You're in the acceptance of this energy role that you have in the collective. It's really hard because all you end up thinking is nobody likes me. Why is there something wrong with me? Well, I better not say that because I don't want to offend anybody. Because every time I do, I offend someone, and they tell me to like I'm too much.
Mm.
And so not being brought up in that supportive environment was really difficult for me. Um, and so I did the only thing that anybody do in survival mode would do, which is well, the only way to survive here is to just pretzel myself and conform and just do what everybody else does. Because that way I won't be reprimanded, that way I won't be punished, that way I will be loved. And the what I've discovered is that manifestors in that energy type above everybody else are the ones that end up having these people pleasing things going on, because we are so different.
So
So
how did the people pleasing get in the way of you being able to connect with yourself?
gosh, what a great question. How long have we got? People pleasing by its very nature is self abandon. You're constantly looking outside of you for validation. So, what others think of you is really, really heightened and important. And what happens is that when you are in a place of I need to survive to be able to just hang out in this world and society, you're not going to be coming from a place of truth nor love, because it's a mask. It's not coming from a trace of authenticity. It's coming from a persona, a conditioning, a way of being that you've learnt to be in the world, not that who you are in the world. And so the way it got in the way was that I wasn't able to share my truth. I wasn't even aware that I had any types of desires. Um, and so whenever I got into a relationship, I would just go along with it. It was like, hi, I'm with you. Like, how can I help you? I would spend a lot of time rescuing and
So
rescuing.
were you looking specifically for people that you could fix or help or, save in a certain way? Those are the type of people that you were attracting?
My first husband was completely opposite. He was actually really good for me. Um, and he was my safe space. And he looked after me really, really well. But it was coming from a place of he was like my security blanket. Um, and but then I went to the other side. I somehow got better. I somehow got into personal development at the age of 30 and started to really work on myself, and then went to the other side and was like, I can save you because I've been doing the work, right? And so I would end up being with men that really needed saving. And so what would happen is the dynamic was a mother child role.
Mm,
I kind of became their mother.
which works great when you want a meal, but not so great when you're getting reprimanded, right? Or you're, people did no, it's not a good
It's not
relationship.
sexy.
Yes,
It's
not at
not a
all
cool
sexy.
dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So what would happen is if I do these things for you, you won't leave. That was the contract I was in. That was the belief system, the paradigm that I was living in. If I do these things for you, you won't leave. And I'd much rather suffer in silence and be in this relationship than I would just to be on my own. And of course, there's an abandonment wound there, which is being protected by all this ways of being. Um, and there's a rejection wound there, and there is a throat wound there. But the throat wound really comes, it's symptomatic of all the other stuff, which is I don't want to be abandoned, but if I am this way, then. And then what happens, of course, if you don't say, if you don't share, if you don't appreciate, if you don't do any of this stuff, you end up resenting because you're not getting what you want, you're not getting your needs met, you're not being able to have an intimate relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is what would get in the way. Ultimately, I wasn't able to really share what was going on for me. um
And intimacy is how we connect, soul to soul. So if you're not really having that, you know, your relationship is going to be on shaky ground.
or really superficial,
Right.
or just the day to day, or and over time I didn't really understand what my role was in the relationship as a woman. I didn't really understand that my role as a woman is to illuminate things that I see and bringing that to the masculine and being able to do it in a way that's loving and caring, because they're not supposed to illuminate things for me. And I was like, fuck that. Why do I always have to be the one? And it's not unusual to hear that from women, is to say, why the hell do I have to be the one? Well, darling, it's our job. It's our heart, you know, we are the heart of the relationship. Now, that's not to say that you know, we do everything for the masculine, because ultimately we say, look, this is a desire that I have. And they go, well, I can either meet you or I can't. But if I can meet you, God forbid it will get done, because they're here to be of service to us. And I'm not saying in the service of like you're my slave. I'm just saying that my partner says to me, is there anything else you would like? I'm here, I'm your walking knight. Is there anything else you would like, my love? And he wants to win with me. He's like, ask, what do you need? And at the beginning, I was just like, this is really odd. I would get really upset about it, because I was just like, well, why can't he just offer? Why do I have to keep asking? This is really annoying.
But you just said he did offer. He would say, "What? I'm your knight, and what else can I do
Yeah,
for you?"
right. But I wasn't hearing that. What I was hearing was,
Okay.
I've got to be the one to ask. Bloody hell. And
Ah,
that's what I was focusing on.
I get what you're saying now. I understand. And yes, I could totally relate to that, because you just want them to do what you want them to do, right? But they can't read your mind. So you have to verbalize what you want. And he was open to listening to what you wanted. He was asking you, "What do you want?" And you were like, "Don't you know? I should, you know me by now. You should already know what I want. You should already know what I need." But, that's not the case. We have to have these conversations. We have to communicate our wants and needs. Otherwise, we will never get our needs met in any situation, including pleasure.
Right. And so I realized that the way I'd been living my life with my partnerships was a fantasy world. It wasn't actually based on any kind of like reality. Because my partner is a real masculine man. Like he calls himself an alpha male. And he is. He's just a caveman. I call him my Cromignon, which basically is like caveman, right? That time. And he's my caveman. He's my ugg. So it's literally like, but it feels so good to me with to be with a man like that, because the other thing I realized is that when I started to really own my desires and my love and my power, um he came into my life, and he probably is the most masculine man that I've ever been with. And I was like, well, I must have really shifted my energy to be in my feminine energy here, to be led. um but I knew that there were things that I still needed to work with, such as, you know, what I was feeling, what to say when I feel dishonored. Because, you know, there are times that he doesn't honor me in the way that I want to be honored. And so I have to tell him that. And it's not okay. And I won't be spoken to in that way. And so for me, being able to say those things was really hard, because I felt like if I did, that he would leave. And what I've had to learn is, oh, he doesn't leave. He's still
Well,
here.
one, he doesn't leave because he's open to listening to you, and two, if he didn't listen and he wasn't interested and he wasn't, taking all of that in, then maybe he should leave, because maybe you need somebody else. You know what I mean? Because if you're not with somebody who wants to listen to you, wants to hear what you have to say, wants to please you, wants to pleasure you, wants to be there for you, wants to be the masculine to your feminine, right? If you're with somebody that doesn't want all of those things, they're going to reject what you have to say. And when you get in a position like that, you have to really consider, is this really truly a person that I want to be with or not?
Right. And so um it's been a journey, but ultimately what I've realized is that the very thing that I had been always looking for, I thought people pleasing could get me that. And what I've actually realized is that it was people pleasing that was getting in the way of me having what I really desired.
In what way?
Well,
Like,
as
give
I've
me a
shared,
specific example if you can.
okay, so as I've shared just now, which is that not being able to share what I want, my desires. Because what I've realized, for example, is that when I wasn't sharing what I desired, I would get resentful. And then that would create an energy that ultimately would repel any type of intimacy. And then I'm like, the more I share what I want, the more the relationship aligns itself to my desires, the more aligned it becomes to who I am. So, in that alignment, like there's been an alignment, it's like your desires shape the relationship. And they either do or they don't, but ultimately my experience so far with him is that it shaped the relationship. It keeps shaping the relationship into the way that I would love it to be. So it's being created as I speak my desires into being.
So
Whereas
you're
if
manifesting the life that you want.
with him, yes, if I'm not sharing what I desire, then I'm not manifesting what I want. Quite simply that.
This is a great way of looking at communication. And I'm always talking about communication because without communication with your partner, you will never get your needs met. And I think that because there's such a stigma about talking about sex, oftentimes women are not communicating what they want and need. In a relationship and in the bedroom. I'm not just talking about sex, but just everything that's involved in being in a relationship. So, you know, manifesting by talking, by telling, by explaining what you want, by telling your partner your desires and even your fantasies, I mean, why not try and get some of those met, or, playing with the idea, you know?
Yeah, and so, I know that this is all comes down to how safe you feel with the person that you're with, and how much safety you feel in your body. Because ultimately, if you're not feeling safe, then it's really hard to like. It's almost like I'm just gonna give it a go. Did I get hurt? And so, it's really small steps. Um, I've been together with him now for three and a half years, and it wasn't always the way I describe it now. It's taken a little bit of time. It's taken a lot of my own journey to kind of get to this point where I'm really free to just share what's on my mind or to say, hey, that wasn't okay. Or, you know, it looks to me like you're really upset. So I'm going to walk away until you calm down so we can have the conversation later. Things like this that in the past I would have just not even been able to have had a conversation about. So um, that's really what I help women do, is to be able to have these sorts of conversations. And what I've realized is that when you're able to have these sorts of conversations, um, you effectively the people pleasing disappears because you are living much more in who you really are and the alignment. So the other thing, of course, is people pleasing didn't allow me to speak out. It was like, you've really hurt me, but I don't, so I'm not gonna tell you, it's fine, don't worry about it. I'll push it under the carpet. And what I've realized is that when I am triggered, I'm able to talk to him about the fact that, hey, I'm triggered, um, I'm angry, but I'm not gonna have the conversation with you right now. I need to calm down and I'll come back to you when I'm much more calm and let's talk about it then. And that for me was also really new. Because I thought that it was just that moment and then I would calm down and not say anything. But difficult conversations actually are, for me now, I've realized that they mean that you care about the relationship. Because if you didn't,
Mhm.
you wouldn't
Right.
have those difficult conversations. You would be like, oh, fuck it, I can't be asked. It's just not worth it.
And there's such a potential there for growth in the
A
relationship.
deeper understanding. Yeah. Anytime there's
Yes.
a job between me and my partner, sometimes we don't have to talk about it. Like there is an understanding. There's a oh shit, I crossed a line because I can feel it energetically. Like he's just crossed a line, or I might have crossed a line. We don't talk about it. We don't need to talk about everything. It's
Hmm.
felt. And then suddenly, like maybe 6 or 7 months later, it might come up in conversation. Um, but it's not like we need to talk about this. It, for me, it's a lot more fluid than that. And but the times that we've had those sorts of conversations, it really does deepen our understanding. Um, and then we kind of end up joking about it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. We all have baggage or shit from our past that we need to heal from, right? I mean, everybody does. And, your first sexual experience set you off on a journey of, negative choices that you made, which eventually you turned around, but it took experience, time, and really looking within to figure out what you needed to do for yourself to get in touch with what you needed and wanted. And so when you were good with who you were, it drew what you needed relationship wise. So I think that's a beautiful thing. And I always like to say that, and this is another reason why I wanted to do this podcast because, I have three nieces, all of them in their 20s. And how can I be a support to them, thinking back to how I was in my 20s, about sexuality, about my body, about, my sexual health. And you think that, or many people say that, in your 20s, you're at your quote unquote prime, right? But as you have all of these experiences and learn about who you are and what you need, you are manifesting a life that's what you want. And to me, that's when you're in your prime. That's when you're living the life that you're creating for yourself and that you want. And so learning these lessons at a younger age, right, would have been fabulous.
Yeah, it'd
And
be
that's
great.
what, and that's what we're here talking about, because we're trying to help women to, get to the point where they're, for me, it's about helping people to find their big clit energy and find that sexual liberation and find their voice in relationships so that they can speak their mind and get their needs met. And, you and the work that you do too.
Yeah, very much so. So I think, there's a real space for us who are a little bit older. I think possibly the younger generations are a lot more clued up than we ever were. Most of my clients actually are in their 40s,
Okay.
which I find really fascinating. And I'm like, wow, that it goes to show that our generation, I think, in some way, shape, or form, was really the generation to kind of fall in between the cracks and between the ones that are coming now, which I think are a lot more clued up than we were, and then sort of we wanted to wake up to something new, and so we did these exploration pieces, and so now we're able to talk about them. Hopefully, being able to help others in the process. So yeah.
Absolutely. Can you tell me what you're doing for your clients? Are you coaching them? What sorts of
So I run women's circles primarily
okay.
online, and
Okay.
I'm running one at the moment called Unshackled Trust, which is really about women having their own back and understanding what that means. Because what I realized was that the abandonment wound isn't the fear of being abandoned by somebody else. It's the fear of not having their own back. So it's kind of an exploration in what does it mean to trust yourself? What does it mean to have your own back? What does it mean to um, yeah, what does it mean, and what does that mean to you? So each week we have a certain theme that we touch on. They have an exploration. I give them reflective questions for them to mull over, and then we journey together. And so the first one was unshackled expression. And that was all around feminine expression, where we touched on their expression around uh, love, well, their desires, their appreciation, their limits, their truth. And then I've got a couple more coming up this year. One will be Unshackled Embodied, which is really about them getting to get basically connecting with their sexual energy. And
Beautiful.
yeah, and the other one is Unshackled Abundance, which is all around people pleasing and money. And then,
Fantastic.
yeah. So, yeah, kind of a little bit of everything, but I feel like it's still relevant to the relationship to the masculine, because I see money especially as um provision, which I think is kind of um a symbol of the masculine. And that's not to say that we can't provide for ourselves. It's just that money for me is more of a symbol of the masculine than it is of the feminine. So yeah, it's just um, something that I moved from the divorce shift side of things into the unshackled woman, as I call her.
Beautiful. And I'm going to ask where my listeners can find you in just a minute. But I always do like to ask this question to my listeners. So I'm going to ask you now, and I hope it's not too personal. What is your favorite sex position?
Ooh. Mm. Gosh, there quite a few. I really enjoy being on top of him, and for him to give me anal sex. I really enjoy anal. And then
Okay, that's a first. I haven't, well, besides the no, that is the first time that I've heard that actually. So I appreciate that because not a lot of women have experienced anal sex. They're afraid of it. They're fearful of the pain. And so,
I
you
love
know,
it. I
if
love it.
you
Actually, there are moments that it's too painful. Like I'll be like, no, it's not gelling with me. But I love it when we do it, and ultimately, it means that my conch is free.
yes, it can be free for other penetrative toys, or you can touch yourself. There's yes, your hands, and I
Fingers,
always
the tongue. I mean, there's all sorts of things. But ultimately, that's that's a position I really really like.
yes, yes, I love that, and so I'm excited to have a new sex position on for this week because it's not necessarily a position. You can do anal sex in many different positions, but it's something that we haven't really talked about too much. And one thing that I will say about anal sex, and I say this about sex in general, is that lubrication is key. And with anal sex, lubrication is a must. So if you want to have anal sex and to explore anal sex, lubrication is number one. And number two is preparing for the penetration with, hands and toys, possibly, or, possibly butt plugs if you're not used to anal sex, so that you can have an experience that isn't painful. So I am going to let you elaborate on that for another minute. We are running out of time, but I definitely want to hear what you have to say about what I just said. And then we're going to wrap it up.
I concur.
You concur. Okay, perfect. Well, then on that note, where can my listeners find you?
So I'm on Instagram at the Unshackled Woman, and I'm on Facebook as well. They can also find me at marinapearson.com. There's a people pleasing quiz that they can take. Yeah, that's where they can find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. As a licensed physical therapist, I treat conditions of the pelvic floor and sexual health issues such as erectile dysfunction, decreased vaginal sensitivity and dryness, painful sex, as we were just talking about, and other sexual related conditions such as incontinence that can cause a lot of issues with sexuality. So if that's you and you can relate to that, or if you want to reach out and say hello, please go to pleaseme.online and reach out for a consultation or to say hi or comments about the podcast. I love to hear from my listeners. I also want to mention that if you're interested in exploring like my guest here today did, Marina, and want to, date, there is a website called SDC.com, and you can use the code 37340 for a 2-month free membership. And that is a website that's geared toward the ethical, non-monogamous population. And so it's a great place to meet people who are open-minded and who want to explore sexually. So go on there again, SDC.com, and my code is 37340. So with that being said, Marina, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was such a fun conversation. I think we could have gone on for another 2 hours, but but we might have to have a part 2. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Until next time.
Bye.
Visit pleaseme.online to reach Eve or for more information on products to increase blood flow and overall health, for her curated list of her favorite toys, and for swag that shows that you are a big fan. Please consider supporting the show.